Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and its tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my whole life.
And my name is Chuck. I'm an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
We started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed Navy videos of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that the government has admitted that UFOs are real,
Or at least that the videos were authentic.
it raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
Right? They may still be unlikely. But there's so many explanations for these stories. Even if the truth is more mundane than you're hoping, if any of it turns out to be true, whew,
Woo! It's a very exciting time. Okay, Chuck, I'm so stoked to be talking to you.
yeah.
Recording the other week without you was a little rough. I
Ah.
can I can also tell you, no one listened to that episode. So,
Well, you know,
I mean, we
that
have
that
like
is
three
interesting.
listeners at the best of times, but yeah,
Right.
nobody wanted to listen to me recommend UFO podcasts and books for some reason.
Well, now I have to admit my secret shame that I haven't listened to it either. So,
Oh, the
um,
deepest cut.
yeah, right. Sometime I want to see our analytics because I think that's cool, but
Oh, I should
yeah,
share them with you. There,
yeah,
there's really nothing to them, but yeah, I'll share them with you. Anyway,
yeah. But anyways,
Chuck, today we're finally going to do it. We are going to talk about the 2022 UAP report. I have been wanting to talk about
ooh,
this
did it come out?
for. It has not come out, which is what we're going to be
Oh,
talking about.
okay, all right. So we're gonna talk generally about the report. Okay,
Yeah,
good,
yeah.
good, good.
So for anybody who doesn't remember, and I'm including Chuck in this, since the last time we talked about this was episode one, the Congress has required that the Pentagon deliver an annual report on the topic of UAPs. They are supposed to deliver a classified version to Congress and an unclassified version to the public.
Mhm.
The first time they did this was in 2021, and the mandate for that was back in 2020. So in 2020, they said you have a year to produce a UAP report.
Okay,
They did that. That came out in June of 2021. And
is that a
then
long enough time? Like 1 year?
it was it was a tight timeline for
Okay,
that
all right,
first one. I think
okay,
the assumption is that when it's an annual thing,
yeah,
it's a little easier because you're kind of
yeah,
updating, like, has anything changed since last
got
year?
it.
That kind of
So the first
thing.
one's always going to be a mess, but after that, hopefully they get better every year. That's the
Yeah.
theory.
And
Okay.
as a reminder, the first one was decent.
Yeah.
A lot
Okay.
of people
Thank
kind
you.
of thought it was a bit of a nothing burger, but I thought it was quite good. It
Okay.
said a few things very clearly. They investigated 144 cases from
Hmm.
military and government sources, and of those, they were only able to successfully identify one. All of the other ones remain unexplained.
Mysterious. All
Um,
right.
yeah, and the report makes it pretty clear these are not
Yeah.
ours. They are not Russian. They are not Chinese.
Yeah.
We don't
Interesting.
know what they are, but
Yeah.
it is not like, oh yeah, this is a Russian jet. We know what it is. Like,
Right.
we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And
And
if it is
that's a big shift
Russian or
from like
Chinese,
weather
yeah,
balloons or whatever. Yeah. Okay.
absolutely, yeah. And more to the point, if it was a foreign adversary, we're not just talking about like, oh, we've got the F-18 and they've got whatever the F-19 or whatever. Like, we're not
Right.
talking a generational shift. We're talking an exponential leap in
Mm.
capabilities beyond what,
Okay.
frankly, we know to be physically possible, like
Right. 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 Yeah.
exceeding the sound barrier without producing a sonic boom,
Yeah.
things like that. So anyway, I thought the report was very interesting. It stopped short of saying, "Oh, there's aliens," but it was like, yes, there are unidentified objects in our sky, in our controlled airspace. They're not natural phenomena. They're not birds. They're not weather patterns. They're not
Yeah.
drones. We don't know what they are.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that came out 2021. Congress then passed a law that said, okay, That report was great. Now you have to put one out every year. So the
Okay.
first of the recurring annual ones was due on October 31st, 2022.
Okay,
We are,
so we're a little late.
yeah.
I mean,
For anybody
okay.
listening to this in the future, we are recording this on December 11th,
Oh yeah.
2022.
Yeah.
So the report is well over a month overdue. Um, and as you can imagine, the UFO community went ape. Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
there's no information, right? It's not like, oh, the report is late and, the OD and I put out a statement about it. Like, we have heard nothing. So
Yeah.
everybody's biases come into play, right?
Right.
Anybody who
Yeah.
believes the government's out to get us, this is just proof you can't trust the government.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody
Yeah.
who is, a former military fan of the government is like, this is all totally normal. You absolute babies. Why would you ever expect anything to come out on time? Everyone knows everything is always late.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
you
That makes
know,
sense to me.
rumors started spreading about what was going to be in the report. So people were already
Mm.
mad about what the report said before we know what the report said. So
Okay. Okay. All right. But
total cluster.
how okay, on a scale of like uh rumors about upcoming Mac products to like something substantiated, that's not a very good scale.
I was
But
gonna say,
uh yeah, like when you hear those rumors, do you think, oh, this is like reasonable, or are you just like, oh yeah, they're just spitballing, they have no idea what's going to be on in the next thing?
they're just spitballing. The
Okay, all
only
right.
people I gave any credit to was people who were government insiders who was like, yeah,
Okay.
reports are late all the time. This is really not as big a deal as y'all are making it out to be.
Okay. All right.
But everyone else was clearly just projecting onto the void.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Now, since October 31st, there have been three things I have heard that I thought made sense. First of all, on November 16th, John Greenwald of The Black Vault, which is a website with the most ominous name, but he is
Yeah,
focused
right.
on freedom of information requests,
Okay.
specifically about UAP stuff. So he submitted a FOIA request asking for the unclassified version of the UAP report because there was a rumor that the classified version had already been delivered to Congress.
Okay.
Um, and that rumor was saying that Congress was unhappy with it and they were sending it back. But anyway, so he
Uh,
sent in a FOIA request.
sorry.
And
What I actually need to step back. I've always
yeah,
wondered this and never known it. What actually is a Freedom of Information Act request, and like what does that, like, I get that. No, I have no idea what it is. I have theories and I
mhm,
think they're all wrong.
sure. It is a process by which you can request files from the government, some of
Okay.
which may or may not be classified. If the files exist, they have to either provide them to you or they have to give you a reason why they are not providing them to you. Um, the
Hmm.
catch has always been you have to know what to ask for. So
Okay.
people always scramble when a new keyword comes out, like, oh, they're calling them UAPs now. Okay, everybody file a whole bunch of new Freedom of Information requests because if you were asking for UFO documents, you wouldn't get anything that said UAP, that kind of thing.
Oh, wait. So like when they get a like I probably just need to read a lot more about this, but is this like when you submit a request to an AI for a new image, you have to get like exactly the right keyword to get something reasonable to come out, but you don't really understand the magic behind it.
Sort of, except instead of an AI, it's an underpaid government staffer
Yeah.
for whom answering freedom of information requests is not their primary job, is a
Right.
distraction from their
Right.
duties. So,
Okay. All right. So, but I mean, effectively, the results are going to be wildly inconsistent and
yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
All right.
And
Cool.
often feel kind of arbitrary. The
Yeah.
Navy recently announced that they would be denying all FOIA requests regarding videos. All videos are classified, which is
Okay.
clearly a nonsense position to take, but like this is the kind of thing that the
Yeah.
community deals. Anyway,
Okay. Got
John
it. All right.
Greenwald,
Thank you.
Black Vault, he's a guy that does FOIA. So he asked for the unclassified version of the report and got back a statement from the Pentagon saying the report has not been delivered yet, but it will be, and we're keeping your request on file. So that was
Okay.
the first like official statement we'd heard from anybody. But
Yeah, right.
as of November 16th, at least, we had confirmation that nothing had been given to anybody. So
Okay.
that at least silenced a particular conspiracy-minded subset of the
Okay.
community.
Yeah.
On November 29th, Ross Coulthart, who is an Australian investigative journalist, I've talked to you about him before, love the guy, does really great work in this field. Um, he said on his podcast, his understanding of the delay is, this is a quote, the office that's meant to be doing this report is so chronically under-resourced, understaffed, unfocused on by the Pentagon that it hasn't been able to get the report completed on time. People are telling me there will eventually be a report, but they're saying, don't get too worked up about the delay. This isn't unusual in the Washington, D.C. scheme of events.
Okay, but isn't this a new department?
It's not only a new department, it is a different department than who produced the first report.
So how can it be chronically understaffed? I don't understand.
There's some politics here.
Okay.
So, real briefly, the
Yeah.
first UAP report was produced by the UAP Task Force, which was hilariously appears to have literally been like a couple of guys.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
it was not a
Sure.
big group. Uh, the this year's report is being produced by like a department in the ODNI, but it's like they hadn't actually created the official office yet. So I don't
Oh.
know if the people who are working on the report are the people who are staffing the office that we're going to be talking about in this episode, which is getting this year's NDAA dramatically increases their scope and funding and resourcing.
Okay.
So I'm unclear how many people are in there. It is entirely possible that at the moment it is under-resourced and underfunded. This gets to something we'll be talking about, which is
Mm.
there's a lot of indications that this topic is so controversial
Yeah.
in the US government that there are basically two factions. There are the people who
Mm.
take it seriously, and there are the people who, for a variety of reasons, want nothing to do with it and
Oh yeah.
actively work to sabotage it when it comes up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
Makes
I
sense.
don't know that for sure, but you definitely
You
get
have
that
to, right?
impression when you dive
Yeah.
into it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So anyway,
Interesting.
that was Ross Coulthart. He's got sources. People talk to him. That kind of lines up with my belief. Like
Yeah.
the report is late and there are politics involved in it. So fine.
Yeah.
A Another quote came out on December 3rd. Christopher Mellon, who is somebody we've talked about before, he was involved in To the Stars with
Mm.
um, Tom DeLonge,
Yeah.
the guy
Yeah.
from Blink 182. He is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. This is a guy who has connections all over the place and absolutely knows how Pentagon and government offices operate. When he was asked about the delay, he said, Congress has added a lot of specific questions to this year's report. They want a lot of information about whether we see connections to foreign governments, is there a threat, and so on. And these reports also go through a lot of internal coordination. And different people along the way have the chance to stop and say, I challenge that. I don't believe that. Prove this to me. Get somebody here to brief me. And every time that happens, it has to get rewritten and it gets sent back. But the good news is they know that this Congress really does care and that they're going to need to deliver this report. It is on the desk of the Director of National Intelligence. I think it'll be out soon.
Mm. Okay. All right. Well, that's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah. And Chris Mellon, there are a lot of personalities in the UFO field who you can take them or leave them. They say some
Hmm.
outrageous things, and it's unclear how much faith to put in them. Chris Mellon is one of the most level-headed guys in this. He and Lou Elizondo in particular, they've always been very clear. They're like, look, we're not here to tell you there are aliens. We don't know what they are. What we're here to talk about is there's stuff flying around in the sky in our theoretically controlled airspace,
Right.
and we don't know what it is, and we have no response to it. That's concerning. at a
Yeah.
bare minimum level, we should be studying these things and aware
Yeah.
of them
Right.
instead of ignoring them because it feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah,
That
when
I
Chris
agree with.
Mellon talks, totally. So when Chris Mellon talks about this stuff, I tend to take him pretty seriously. And again, as a government and Pentagon insider, he would have a good understanding of how these things get done.
Yeah.
So if he tells me, hey, it's happening, it's just slow and controversial, yeah, that makes perfect sense
Yeah. I mean, I've certainly never worked on a project that was late before.
to me. So yeah, so that's the UFO report. That's UAP report 2022. It's late. It's supposed to drop any minute now.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
has been supposed to drop any minute now for about a month and a half.
Yeah.
So who knows?
Makes sense.
Maybe by the time you're listening to this, it's out.
We-
I have several times asked Chuck to delay recording of an episode in the hopes that the UAP report would drop and we could talk about that. And then it
Yep.
just keeps not happening. So
Yeah.
since we're about to take some time off with the end of the year, I thought, you know what, let's put a pin in it. Let's talk about what we know today because there are some interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. This is like an
Part of the reason,
umbrella, right?
sorry, go ahead.
Like this is an umbrella. If we bring our umbrella, it won't rain. So maybe if we do a podcast about how there's still no report, maybe it'll come out tomorrow.
Fingers crossed, man.
But now I've said
Uh,
it. I don't know. It's probably not
yeah, yeah.
happening.
So that said, I don't think we're done talking today. I got a couple other things I'd
Yeah.
like to talk about on this topic. First of
Yeah.
all,
Totally.
this idea of dueling factions in the government. I want to dig into that a little more. There were two really interesting articles that came out around Halloween about the UAP report. Um, and they portray this idea from different sides. And I got some interesting quotes there. And after that, what I'd like to talk about is the 2023 NDAA just passed. If anybody listened to our first episode, you may remember I talked a lot about some provisions that were in it, but they hadn't been voted on yet. They hadn't been approved. Well, it's done now. This thing
Hmm.
is in law. This is part
Nice.
of the Pentagon funding. And there's some really interesting rules in there, including about whistleblower protection. So we'll talk about that as well.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Let's dig
Yeah.
in.
So before I dive in, you got any questions? Anything you wanted to ask?
No. Let's dig in. I'm excited.
Okay. All right. So I mentioned there were two articles that came out. So first of all, the New York Times put out an article on October 28th, and then the Daily Mail put out an article on the 31st. Both of them talking about the upcoming UAP report. The New York Times article's headline was Many military UFO reports are just foreign spying or airborne trash. Now, without knowing anything about the topic of the article, I'm sure you can imagine that went down like a lead balloon in the community.
Yeah. I mean, or in this case, if it's airborne trash, it probably wouldn't be lead. But yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So the main takeaway here is in that article, there's a quote. It says, of the cases that have been resolved, most have proven to be either errant junk in the sky, like balloons, or surveillance activity.
Yeah. I mean, that
Now,
doesn't.
sorry, go
How
ahead.
did they violate one of the five criteria? Um,
Mm, yeah.
yeah. So it can't just be errant junk. Like, I want to talk about the
Mhm.
whole system. Like, how do we have sensors on $100 million craft that can't tell the difference between a Mylar bag and a foreign drone? Like,
Yes.
I,
Yes.
I,
You just
I mean,
hit the
maybe it's
nail on the head,
complicated,
buddy.
but
Yeah.
like,
So two things here. First of all, no one's ever said every single report is a UFO. That's not what anyone's saying. You know,
right,
what
yeah,
they said, what I have heard my entire life from Blue Book onward is the vast majority of UFO reports are
right,
explainable, right?
uh-huh,
Like a lot of people are seeing, like, especially now, we get tons of UAP reports on Reddit that are
yeah,
Starlink.
yeah,
Apparently,
yeah,
Starlink satellites
okay,
will do something where they'll kind of dip through a high spot in the atmosphere, so they
sure,
flare for a moment. But what happens is Starlink runs in trains. So you'll get a
Mm,
satellite flare moving from left to right. Then you get another flare moving from left to right. From your perspective, what you see is this light moving left to right and left to right and left to right over and over again. You're like, what the hell is
sure.
happening here? There's clearly an object up there zipping back and forth. Well, no, what's happening is it's a train of objects that you can't see. Anyway, like I said,
Yeah.
vast majority of reports are explainable. They always have been. The number I've always heard is like something like 80 to 90% are explainable. So if I
Sure.
hear the government has explained over half of the reports, I go, okay, that's more than I was expecting to remain unexplained. That's a pretty good hit ratio.
Yeah. Right.
Uh,
Uh,
and the other thing that I think you just nailed is if people are raising the red flag saying, hey, there are unknown items flying around in our sky that we don't have control of, and the military comes back and says, oh, don't worry about it. Those are just Chinese drones.
yeah.
Okay, that
Yeah.
doesn't make me feel better.
Yeah. Or I actually feel roughly the same if it's a Mylar balloon and our equipment can't tell that,
Yeah,
like, oh,
absolutely. Yeah,
that Mylar balloon is what's one of the
yeah,
criteria, like moving at enough G's that it would liquefy humans? Like,
yeah,
clearly it's not.
exactly.
So what's broken about this system? On the other hand, I don't have any idea how many craft or how many like sightings or like how many blips there are. Like when I think about the number of bizarre errors that happen to my website,
Hmm.
and,
Yeah,
and I can't spend time investigating every one of them, and they're all bizarre. So
totally.
I
How
don't
many
know.
bugs have you gone to fix and you changed something and the bug went away and you have no idea what caused the
Yeah,
bug, but you're like, all right, well, I'll take the win.
yeah, Heisenbug.
Yeah,
I love it.
yeah, totally.
Yeah,
So anyway, as you can imagine, the UFO community was not thrilled about this.
yeah.
I think Exo Academian had the best reaction to this on Twitter. He responded sarcastically, investigations make clear that the vast majority of hits in baseball are not home runs.
Yeah, 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 yeah. They
Right.
must. Yeah. Okay, this all makes sense. Now I understand the meme I saw that said something like home runs don't exist,
Yeah,
or whatever.
exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So to I read the article. It's not a terrible article, but it's very focused on its message. I'm going to read
Mm,
one quote from it. It said,
okay.
incidents recorded in the past year, for which more data has been collected, have turned out to have ordinary earthbound explanations. Officially, many of the older incidents are still unexplained, and there's just too little data to make final conclusions. Officials insist that even though the evidence is imperfect, the grainy videos do not show space aliens.
Hmm,
So, two thoughts. First of all, sure, I buy that.
okay.
The Nimitz encounter was, I think, 2004. That's 20 years ago at this point almost. I
Yeah.
believe
Oh,
sensor
shit.
technology is way better and we have more up there now. No problem.
Did we have iPhones then?
Yeah, I forget what year it came out.
Yeah.
Uh, the other thing is that last line there. Okay. Officials insist that the grainy videos do not show space aliens. Okay. This is a
All right.
pet peeve of mine. This is a distraction technique.
Yeah.
The people that I trust, the people I care about, Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, the others, the level-headed people, they're not talking about space aliens. They are pointedly not talking about space
Oh, yeah.
aliens. Now, they leave that door open,
Sure.
but they are not saying we need to look at this because it's alien. They're saying we need to look at this because we don't know what it is.
Right.
So when I see somebody who keeps repeatedly saying, well, it's obviously not space aliens, like, okay, sure, but you're kind of missing the point.
Yeah.
What is it? We should be able, if you believe, as I think is a reasonable conclusion, that space aliens are an unlikely answer, you need to be able to provide a better answer. And if your better answer is balloons and swamp gas and stuff like that, like you're not selling me on it. This article in the New York Times, which by the way was an opinion piece, unlike
Oh, okay.
the earlier ones, which were
Okay.
heavily researched, uh, it's 1,300 words long, which I don't know if you do a lot of writing. So not most people, I think, don't think about things in terms of word
Yeah.
length, but
Yeah,
that
that's
ain't long. This is
okay.
not a lengthy article. In this 1,300 word article, they repeat that claim 10 times. This is not space aliens. It's not aliens.
Okay.
I don't know what it is, but it ain't aliens. This ain't aliens. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
It's not aliens. Like, okay, man, I
Yeah.
get it. Like, it's very clear this report had an agenda.
Yeah.
Ross Coulthart came in all head up about it. Now remember, Ross
Yeah.
is an investigative
Yeah.
journalist, right? Like this is his deal. And he's very aware that he's one of the few like credible mainstream journalists who takes the topic seriously. So he's a little
Yeah.
defensive of it. If somebody comes out and writes something like this, he's gonna get all up in
A
his
little heated.
all up in himself about it. Yeah, a little heated.
Yeah.
So his quote was, a shameful story, a complete joke. Classic piece of quiet little briefing in a quiet room to a reporter who is obviously trusted to do the right thing and peddle out the usual lines. There was not one questioning moment in the article which put them on the spot. Basically, American officials supposedly familiar with the findings of the Pentagon and intelligence agencies' examination of the incidents reassuringly stated, don't you worry your tiny little heads. Most of this stuff is just weather balloons, airborne clutter, or surveillance operations by other countries. Don't worry yourself, all is fine.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, here's the thing I had just read the article and I didn't love it, but I was kind of prepared to be like, all right, like they make some reasonable points, like, hey, collection is better now that we have better equipment. And then
Sure.
Ross read that, I'm like, no, you know what? He's right. Like, I'm mad about this. Like,
Yeah.
no, nowhere in this article do they push back on anything or be like,
Yeah.
okay, but what about the half that remain unexplained?
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
even the
Any,
2% that are home runs. Like
Exactly.
we can't.
Yeah. So I totally believe that most of these UAP reports are not evidencing the five criteria that we talked about earlier, which, by the way, we should probably do an episode on.
Yeah.
But ignoring those because most of them don't is anyway. It sounds like we're very
Yeah.
much on the same page here. This
Yeah.
one really bothered me. So
Yeah.
3 days later, the Daily Mail puts out their own article uh, titled "Only Half of UFO Sightings Can Be Explained." Now, I always love looking at these articles and seeing who they say the sources are.
Yeah.
So the New York Times article was, like Ross said, American officials familiar with the Pentagon's findings, right?
Uh,
That could be anybody, right? It could be
anyone.
the freaking janitor in the White House. Like we don't
Yeah.
know who that is. Um, Daily Mail didn't get a lot more specific, but they said two sources close to the department, close to ODNI, and later the quotes that they have are attributed directly to an
Oh,
ODNI, Office of the oh
Department
God,
of
what was it?
National Intelligence, isn't it?
Office of the Director of National Intelligence.
Director
So
of National Intelligence. Yeah.
these quotes that I'm going to read you are directly from an ODNI source. So
Okay.
not some rando who saw the report. Well, it might be some rando who saw the report, but it is at least an ODNI rando as opposed to
Right.
maybe a congressional staffer who doesn't like what they're doing or something. So their article says two sources close to the department say the report analyzes 366 cases and about half are unexplained. As a reminder, the 2021 report only looked at 144 cases and explained only one of them. So they've doubled the number of cases that they're looking into, and they say they're all from US military or government sources.
Okay.
So again, I ain't mad about this.
Yeah.
You've got twice as many cases as you did the previous year. Only half of them are explained. That that feels about right to me.
Sure.
I would be suspicious if they continued being unable to explain 99% of them. That number is too weird, and it kind of tells me you're not looking very hard. finding explanations for half of them tells me you're doing your job. You're looking at them and you are finding the explanations. Like you, I don't care about the ones that have explanations. That's good. I'm glad you figured out this one's a weather balloon, that one's a drone.
Yeah.
Let's go back and talk about the ones you don't know.
Yeah.
So the quotes in this are bangers, though. They
Yeah.
found a guy at the ODNI to talk about this on the record. He says, okay, the report is not as detailed as you might hope. It spent a lot of time jumping into the foreign surveillance that was discovered, which has nothing to do with UAPs. There's a
Mm.
lot of attention to that, and just about nothing about the other 49% of cases that were not resolved.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes sense. The community's vibe was this New York Times article was the Pentagon kind of seeding into public opinion what was
Right.
going to be in the report. Hey, we know what half of them are. Like, don't worry about it. They're Chinese
Right.
drones. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
And please stop bothering us about this.
Yeah. If it had come out
Yeah.
anywhere near the actual report, it might have been really effective.
Yeah. If it had been released on the 31st, it might have. Yeah. Unfortunately, we had a bit of time to tear it apart.
Yeah.
So the source goes on. He says, and this is where he gets real angry about it. He says, they're patting themselves on the back that they've resolved over half of them. But we don't give a crap about the ones they've resolved. Yeah, there's balloons up there, and balloons are sometimes mistaken for UAP. But there are shitloads of classified videos that are pretty profound and pretty clear. They don't want to talk about this stuff because they really, really don't know what the hell they are. That's the truth. And
Interesting.
that is something I have heard over and over again from people who have military sources is a factor here, not the factor, but a
Yeah.
factor is definitely it's a bad look for the military to come out and say, we spent trillions of dollars on this. We have the most advanced sensor apparatuses on Earth, and we have no earthly idea what these things are, how they do these things, and we can do nothing about them.
Yeah. Pun
I get
intended.
it. That's rough, you know?
Yeah. Pun intended when you said earthly idea.
No, total slip up on my part.
One thing, so I just looked it up. ODNI has about 2,000 people. So
Mhm,
it's certainly a smaller number than a,
mhm.
what was it, someone close to the Pentagon. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
but
A U.S. government official.
yeah, 2K is still quite a few. But yeah, it's interesting. Um, yeah, I wish they gave more info about the source, but I understand they,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And again, I think they assumed the report was going to drop like that day. They released it on the 31st. I think
yeah,
they thought this was going to be a little bit of hot gossip and kind of a chance to smear the New York Times article that nobody
right.
was happy about. And then it turns out to be like one of the only things we've gotten from the government in a month and a half of silence.
Yeah. Is Daily Mail regarded as a reputable news source?
Oh man, I was afraid you were going to ask me that. I
All
don't know.
right.
Probably not. I'll just go
Okay.
out there
All
and
right.
say I'm not staking my reputation on this.
Okay.
I
All right.
thought it
All
was
right.
really interesting the contrast
Yeah.
between these two articles
Yeah.
because on paper they were reacting to the same information.
Hmm.
We think the UAP report says about half of the reports are explained. That's it. That
Hmm.
is the meat of what they're reporting. And they took it in very different angles. The first
Yeah.
one, while I don't think it was quite as condescending as Ross Coulthart thought, definitely had a little bit of a "don't you worry your pretty little head about it"
Yeah.
vibe.
Yeah.
And the second one definitely had a "they're lying to you" vibe. They're
Yeah.
covering this up because they don't want to
Mm.
admit it.
Yeah. All
You
right.
and I have
I'm
talked about this
seeing.
offline. I think the
Yeah.
truth is probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. I'm definitely seeing what you're talking about with the the sort of like preconceptions coming out. In the
Mhm.
absence of real data, we insert
Yes.
whatever our lens says. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. So my kind of closing thought on this, there's a guy named Eric Weinstein who talks about this topic. He had a really good quote on this. He said, official Washington tells us we have lost control of the airspace.
Hmm.
This is one of those things. If I said that in the podcast, you'd be like, pump the brakes there, Scott. Where
Yeah,
did they
right.
say that? How did they say it? I believe he is referring to the same thing that I have been saying. They have admitted UAPs are real in the
Yeah,
sense that there are objects in the sky that we don't have control over and we can't identify.
yeah.
They're in our airspace. If you believe the claims we've seen about them, especially the five observables, there is reason to have concerns on a national security ground. And I think it is reasonable to describe this as having lost control of the airspace. But
Yeah.
definitely, he's stating it in an inflammatory way. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so official Washington tells us we lost control of the airspace, but also we should not in any way freak out because it's mostly just a combination of, hypersonic enemy drones of rival powers and some ultra high performing seagulls. Which is to say, we clearly have two factions in the government who are not allowed to file separate reports. And the result is total intellectual incoherence. That
Yeah,
I think was a really interesting way to put a pin in it. Like, we are seeing these conflicting messages, and it is confusing.
yeah,
And it makes sense if, as we hear from a lot of people, there are these two wildly dueling factions in the government. Um, and I've got a note here to talk about it, but we've been going on for a while, so I'm not going
yeah,
to. But I will say we should probably do an episode in the future about the history of Project Blue Book in particular, and how
yeah,
from the very early days it was whipsawing back and forth between a genuine, coherent investigative body and an absolute bit of like PR and convince the public there's nothing to see here debunking effort. There has always been this tension. And we have heard from Edward J. Ruppelt, who is the guy who was in charge of Blue Book to begin with, that this was existing back then, that the US
mm,
government had basically divided into two camps. Either you were not pro UFO, but either you believed the extraterrestrial explanation and you took this seriously, or you thought it was a bunch of bunk. And
yeah,
because it became political, it became this thing where people break down on opposite sides, and you saw things like struggles over funding and
yeah,
political machinations over a preconceived conclusion, right? If you've already decided UFOs are nonsense, you're going to be angry that we're wasting money and time
yeah,
on this. If you think UFOs are a legitimate subject and worthy of study, you're going to be upset that people keep stopping you from
right.
pursuing it. So
Yeah.
I think that explains some of this disjointed response that we see.
Oh, yeah. People are the worst. Also, I'm disappointed to find that there is not already a band that's been formed called Ultra High Performing Seagulls, or if there is, they don't have a website. And I feel like we should register ultrahighperformingseagulls.com and redirect to the
Probably should.
podcast or
Yeah, that's a
something.
great idea.
Yeah.
All right, man. So
Let's
yeah,
carry on.
that's that's the UAP report.
Yeah.
It's
All right.
late. There's a lot of
Yeah.
indication that the government is somewhat fractured over
Sure.
what to do on this stuff. But I kind of go back to that quote from Chris Mellon. He's like, the good news is that whatever you think of the military and the Pentagon, whether they're dragging their feet on purpose, whether they're inept, whether they're just overburdened, whatever, the good news is they know that this Congress really does care and they
Yeah.
must deliver something.
Yeah. Which is great.
And that brings us nicely to our next topic, which is the NDAA.
Yeah.
This thing just passed, and man, there are some juicy bits in here that I
All
am
right.
really excited about. I'm going to be reading quotes from a couple of sources as we talk
Okay.
about these. Um, Most of them are from Chris Mellon. Again, he
Okay.
gave that December 3rd, he was at a UFO conference and he was talking about this stuff. So he kind of recapped some of the stuff
Got it.
that was in it. At that time, the NDAA had not yet passed. It
Right. Okay.
has since passed, which means we have access to the final language. So I have gone through and supplemented some of Chris's quotes with a bit of the final language where I thought it helped explain things a little bit.
Okay. Cool.
But
Thank you for summarizing, because I would never have made it through all
yeah,
those things.
no, totally. It is some dry reading, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Um, but it boils down to a few high level things. We're going to talk about
Okay.
each of these, and I'll pause on each so you can give
Okay.
your thoughts. But in a nutshell, the 2023 NDAA calls for increased congressional reports and improved funding to the UAP office.
Okay.
That UAP office is well resourced and well funded now. There's
Okay.
a big section in here about whistleblower protection that's very
Mm.
exciting. Um, there's an open question about whether any of the information coming out of this will remain classified or whether the public will ever see it.
Mm.
And last of all, I'll save this for last because I think it's funny. The term UAP has been redefined. It no longer stands for unidentified aerial phenomena. You want to take a guess at
Oh.
what the new definition is? It's still UAP.
Oh man. God, I don't
For
know.
our listeners' notes, I am putting Chuck on the spot like 30 minutes after he ate dinner. He was
Yeah,
expecting to
right.
just sit
Yeah,
down
I'm
and listen
like,
to me rant. Now I'm like, Chuck, think of a funny acronym.
I mean, it has to be unidentified alien phenomenon, right?
Ooh, that's a good guess. That's a good guess. I'll tell you in a few minutes. Okay.
You just-
No, I'm gonna
All
make you
right,
wait
all
for
right,
it,
all right.
buddy. I'm gonna.
Now this
This
is
is
my
where if
reward for sitting through the NDAA.
this is where if we had ads, I would cut to an ad right now. Like, come back after the ad.
Oh, that's terrible. All right.
Okay, so first of all, increased congressional reports and funding. So Chris Mellon says we have legislation that requires a review of all historical documents from the intelligence community relating to the UAP issue all the way back to World War II.
Whew.
Now, we briefly talked about this before. I mentioned that it was really interesting that they had said you have to give us everything going back to 1947, which
Yeah.
happens to be the year that Roswell theoretically happened.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Yeah,
they've
makes
actually
sense.
pushed it even further back now.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
So the final
Cool.
language says the report is to include a compilation and itemization of the key historical record of the involvement of the intelligence community with unidentified anomalous phenomenon
Oh,
going
there
back
it
to
is.
January 1st, right? Oh no, I
Yeah. Now I don't have
I
to sit through
spoiled
the
it.
commercial.
I should have censored that. Oh man.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, yeah, it's anomalous now. We'll get to why later. Going back to January 1st, 1945, including any program or activity that was protected by restricted access that has not been explicitly and clearly reported to Congress. So, if you have a secret program and Congress doesn't already know about it, you have to include it in this report. Two, successful or unsuccessful efforts to identify and track unidentified anomalous phenomena. So, I don't care whether you were successful or not. If you had a program that was running for a number of years where you were trying to track them, you have to tell us about it. Three, this one's really interesting. Any efforts to obfuscate, manipulate public opinion, hide, or otherwise provide incorrect, unclassified, or classified information about unidentified anomalous phenomenon or related activities. If you lied to us or the public, you have to tell us.
Mm.
Whew.
Interesting.
Now, again,
Interesting.
that date, it's hard for me not to see this through the lens of we think you recovered a crashed saucer at Roswell in 1947, and a number of programs grew out of that, and you have
Yeah.
been lying to us, and you have to tell us. Now, who knows, right? But the reason I find the NDAA so fascinating, we've talked about this briefly before, is politicians are risk averse. The
Hmm.
UFO topic is risky. It's less
Right.
risky than it used to be, but it's still not something any politician wants to come up in a town hall or a debate. You don't
Yeah.
want to publicly pin your name to this. For congressional leaders in an election year to go in and stake this kind of language in there, they're not doing that lightly. They're doing that
Hmm.
because they expect to get some information. They have
Yeah.
been hearing through backdoor sources that this information exists. They're unsuccessful at getting it through the proper channels. So they're passing a law saying, you have to tell us. I find that
Right.
really interesting. It doesn't mean the information exists,
Sure.
but I think this is not a random question. This is an
Yeah.
informed question.
Yeah. And I think it is informed. And I think from the lens of a politician, I think there's an additional little aspect in there that they believe it exists and that they can spin it to their benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So I
for
can
sure.
totally see that.
Yeah. Okay. Next item.
Okay.
This new office is going to be well resourced. So remember Ross Coulthart's throwaway line
Hmm.
about this department is underfunded, underfocused on, etc.
Okay.
So Chris Mellon says this legislation requires the Defense Department, the intelligence community, the Department of Homeland Security to review and identify any non-disclosure agreements related to UAP whatsoever and submit those to this new office that's being created. The director of that
Hmm.
office is being given bodies from every component of the intelligence community and the military services. I read that to mean rather than expecting them to hire new staff, it's like, okay, the Air Force has to give a couple guys, the Navy has to give a couple guys, the CIA has to give a couple guys. Like everyone has to feed into this body. Um,
Yeah.
being given bodies from every component. So this is a well-resourced, well-funded operation. It is not like the UAP task force, which was sort of notional, and they had a couple people in an office. This is a serious, well-resourced organization. The Congress is demanding that the director of this office reports into the highest levels of the Defense Department and the intelligence community, and those departments are under direction from Congress to support this operation. This is another really interesting thing because originally the Pentagon had said, hey, you don't have to pass any laws. Look, we created a UFO office. We gave it a confusing acronym and we nested it 30 levels deep in the org
Yeah.
chart.
Right.
Don't worry about it. We're on this. So Congress is like, no, you have to have this body. It has to be serious. It has to be well resourced, and it has to report to the highest levels of the Pentagon. I looked it up. I didn't recognize the job title, so I'm not going to embarrass myself by guessing where
Okay.
that person sits in the org chart. But Chris Mellon and a few other people I saw talking about this are saying the reason this language is significant is they're not allowing this to be buried in 12
Mm,
layers deep of the org chart and all these people can get in the way. The director of this new office has the ability to report to the highest level of government. And importantly, those levels of government know that Congress is putting pressure on them. So they're
right.
motivated to get the right information out. So
So
this
you
is
had
all
said
directly
previously,
responding. Yeah.
yeah, you'd said previously that like admirals and like high leadership and everything would specifically try not to learn contentious things so that if
Mm-hmm.
they were
Yeah.
called up to Congress, they wouldn't be able to answer. Does that kind of address this type of thing? Is that your thinking?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I
Don't know. Okay.
believe it does, but yeah, my take on it is yes. I don't think Congress was any happier than we were with the public hearing they had, where two
Sure.
guys came in who didn't know anything.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
that's a bad situation. So Congress said, all right, you don't want to bring us the information. Here you go. You have to create a body that's responsible for this information, and it has to report to these people who report to us. That's my read on it.
So
But yeah,
yeah. Another, so from that same fact sheet where I got the 2,000 people, it mentions that ODNI is over 17 different intelligence community departments.
mhm.
So that says to me they've gone from two to at least 17. Um,
Yeah,
like that's a big increase.
it is. The intelligence community is not a small part of the
Yeah,
U.S. government.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Kind of wild.
So anyway, yeah, I don't want to keep banging this drum, but
Yeah,
in a nutshell, this is not two guys in a corner office who have no authority. This
Yeah.
is explicitly mandated by law. It has to be a real thing with a real director, reporting to real people, actual funding, actual
Hmm.
people. Okay,
One last question. What's your take on why is this department reviewing and identifying any non-disclosure agreements related to UAP? Well, I just didn't understand what that meant.
because I put that in the wrong section.
Oh,
That was
okay,
part
great.
of the reporting section that I should have said
Okay,
earlier. But yeah, basically, non-disclosure plugs into what we're about to talk about,
oh,
whistleblower
okay.
agreements. But Congress is basically putting down, you have to tell us all this stuff. So
Hmm.
if there are people who have non-disclosure agreements, Congress needs to know about that, as opposed to,
Okay.
don't worry about it. It's all in the Black Ops budget and, unacknowledged special access program. And like two people have access to it and you don't need to worry about it. Congress
Okay,
is
so
like,
this
no,
is
we need to know.
this is NDAs related to government positions, or do you think this is also corporate NDAs
I'm
or
unclear about
unclear?
that. I wouldn't be
Okay, yeah,
surprised if it meant both, but I don't know if they actually have that power. But
yeah,
let's
okay,
go on to
great,
the next section because they
yeah,
talk about this explicitly.
okay,
So the next section, this is the juiciest part. This is the part
okay.
people care about the most. Whistleblower protection. Ooh, buddy, it's gonna get good this year.
You look jazzed.
Okay, I'm so jazzed. I was convinced this was gonna get axed. It's
Okay,
too exciting, right?
yeah.
Okay, so first of all, from the final language, they define the scope of interest of the whistleblower protection as any activity or program related to unidentified anomalous phenomena, including with respect to material retrieval, material analysis, reverse engineering, research and development, detecting and tracking, development or operational testing, and security protections and enforcements. Now, remember we talked about informed questions?
Yeah, that's real specific.
Yeah, they didn't just say any program related to unidentified anomalous phenomena. They were like, specifically
Yeah,
material recovery and analysis and reverse
yeah,
engineering. And that is a
interesting.
targeted question, man. Okay, so
Yeah,
the whistleblower protection is specifically about that. So the final language says this new office is directed to create a secure process by which to receive that information and validate it and report it to Congress. Those bringing information forward into the new system are not thereby committing any violation of the laws or executive orders that govern classified national security information,
mm,
nor are they to be impeded from that disclosure by any previously applicable non-disclosure agreement. Your
interesting.
NDA doesn't apply to keeping Congress informed.
Yeah, yeah. That totally makes sense, and I'm sure they can come up with a way to make that viable.
Mhm.
It's all like, yeah, you can find people in there who have the highest levels of clearance. So, you know, yeah, and I think it makes sense to have a group who's responsible for making that process work.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. I
And
like that.
again, talking about informed questions, the
Yeah,
word on the street has been for some time that Congress is already receiving
sure.
closed doors, off the book briefings from people who do have security oaths and are
Yeah.
telling them but can't do so publicly on the record. So the rumor is Congress already knows a lot of this stuff, but need to be able to publicly say how they know it and have people testify. So this is crossing the T's and dotting the I's beyond just,
Mm.
yeah, I talked to a guy and he told me this.
I wonder if, mm, okay, my read on it, and granted, I am very
Mm-hmm,
uninformed, but to me, this feels like we suspect that there are people who are not telling us things because
mm-hmm.
they're restricted, not so much,
I think it's both. I
yeah, okay,
absolutely.
all
Yeah,
right, cool.
you are 100% correct. And for example, Lou Elizondo has been very clear that he would love to testify to Congress, but is
Mm,
not legally allowed to.
okay,
So there are definitely people in that camp.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
so
Got it.
here's the Chris Mellon quote, and this was the one that got me jazzed about it. Whistleblower protection, this is wonky stuff, right? Like we are getting into like legal territory.
Yeah.
I'm not a
Right.
lawyer. I'm not in the
Yeah.
government. I'm not in the military. I don't have a security oath. I don't actually know what the hell I'm talking about. You just said you don't know what you're talking about. The only reason I know more than you is I'm on Reddit. Like I don't know. I
The
don't know,
highest quality
right?
source of information, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But Chris Mellon, again, this is a guy I trust. This is a guy who has a reason to know.
Yeah.
His take on this: if people have concerns, it is noteworthy that this legislation stipulates that in the event there is any kind of retaliation against someone who does come forward, they can sue not only for compensatory damage, so their lost salary,
Compensatory.
they can sue, yes, thank you. Uh, they can sue for punitive damages. They can get
Oh,
a large multiple of whatever their
yeah.
salary is or whatever damages they've suffered.
Sure.
The US government cannot declare bankruptcy over this and escape
Hmm.
judgment on this. The
Sure.
legislation also provides for injunctive relief for anybody who comes forward. So, if there's somebody working at Lockheed Martin on some program and they come out through this process and Lockheed Martin were to try to do something, they could get a court order to overturn that and remain in their position until the issue is adjudicated. And there are also criminal sanctions that are already on the books against taking action against anybody who approaches Congress
Yeah.
with whistleblower information. So there's a lot of features in this legislation that should reassure anybody who is considering coming forward. If you have information regarding a classified UAP, US government program or activity, anything having to do with recovered materials or collections or efforts to conceal this or to manipulate public opinion or anything of its kind,
Cool.
this is here to protect you. And he then
Yeah.
goes on to say, I have a number of lawyers who have agreed to work pro bono on this. Like,
Nice.
come talk to me. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. That's dope. I
right?
am jazzed about that. Yeah, and I get the like I'm a little torn on whether I would want to be in that position or not.
Oh,
Um,
God, no.
like,
No.
but on the other hand, maybe it means I get to like work and quote unquote work for the
Right.
next 20 years and not actually do anything. I don't know.
I always wonder about that when you hear about these people who get a judge to say you weren't actually allowed to fire this person, you must keep them at their position. It's not like they're going to be happy you're there.
Yeah,
Like,
right?
okay, yes, legally I still have this job. I don't really believe you're coming into the office every day and like shooting the shit with your. I don't know. Like it
Yeah, I
probably
don't know.
depends on the situation, but if I'm the guy at Lockheed Martin who blew the cover off of their deep black ops UFO program, I don't
Right?
think I'm walking back into the office on Tuesday like it's cool, guys. The judge
No,
said I get to keep my job.
right? Like you are definitely doing janitor work now. Like you're not doing anything
Yeah, yeah,
interesting. Like I don't know.
exactly.
It's interesting.
It's really interesting. But yeah, again, this is this is some really fascinating stuff because Congress didn't just put a little bit of stuff in here. There's a big chunk in here that is specifically about we want people to come forward. And Chris Mellon's take on it was this is our opportunity to get to the bottom of these rumors that have been swirling for years
Hmm.
about whether the government has anything, whether there are special programs, whether they've gone into the private industry. Like,
Right.
this is it. Like, now there's, an open door
Yeah.
invitation for people to come forward. And again, the rumor we've been hearing from Lou Elizondo and a lot of others, like Eric Davis, is they have just been waiting.
Yeah.
And we are expecting that in the coming year, we are going to get closed doors
Yeah.
congressional hearings. But what they find out in those hearings may lead to stuff that's very exciting.
Yeah. Totally.
Anyway, one last bit on the whistleblower language. So
Okay.
Chris Mellon had already talked about all the interesting stuff, but there was one bit of language added in the final version that I don't think he knew about. This is final language. If the office receives through the secure system a disclosure about a UAP related restricted access program that had not previously been disclosed to the Congressional Defense or Intelligence Committees, The Secretary of Defense shall report such a disclosure to those committees and the congressional leadership within 72 hours.
Smart. Yeah.
This is not a, hey, you got to tell us when you get around to it. No, you find something
Hmm.
out, you're in chambers with us tomorrow. We
Yeah.
need to know, and we expect to know. No dilly-dallying, no putting it off. This is your job now. I love that.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm excited about that too.
Yeah. Now, of course, Chris also goes on to talk about, you know, the UAP report is over a month late. And nobody's being held to account for that. So, you know, these deadlines and these like this language only matters if there's teeth. Only matters if if there's actually a willingness on the part of the Congress to enforce them. That's the part that remains to be seen, right? It's one thing to pass a law; it's another thing to actively haul, you know, a sitting general up for contempt of Congress and say, "Look, you're
Right.
either going to do what we told you to do, or you're going to prison."
Yeah. Right.
That's a whole other thing, you know. Okay, so speaking of, will it remain classified?
Yeah.
Chris Mellon was asked that. He had a great answer, which matches what I've heard from a few other people. The process involves reporting to Congress. The unclassified reports, like the ones we're waiting for, will continue as long as this office remains in effect. The whistleblower provisions and that information will remain in classified channels, but it will be delivered to multiple committees on the Hill. Now, what congressional leadership does with that information at that point is up to them. They have procedures that they have the possibility, if they want to take the information public or declassify it. They're rarely used procedures, but they could do that. They could decide if this becomes a reality and they get confirmatory information to go to the White House and say, you know, we can't sit on this. You've got to come to grips with this. You've got to tell the public. We won't know until we get to that point. I know some people are disappointed that there's not an immediate automatic declassification. I would only suggest to people that this is a huge process and a huge opportunity. So I think what it boils down to is him saying, like, yeah, it's disappointing that it's not automatic declassification, but it's a big opportunity. And I 100% agree with that. Like, would I
Yeah.
love it if, you know, Congress put out a report tomorrow saying, hey guys, the military told us it's real? Like, yeah, of course, that would be amazing. But the thing I care about more than anything is that people are taking this seriously, that is getting
Yeah.
evaluated properly. And it doesn't seem that the military has the will to do that as far as
Yeah.
we've been seeing. Seeing Congress step up is encouraging. I don't believe that means that we're going to get official confirmation through official channels tomorrow. But Ross Coulthart pointed out there is absolutely precedent for extremely classified information to leak.
Yeah.
During the,
Yeah.
oh God, it was in the 80s. There was some CIA shit that was getting investigated, like called the Church Committee or something. There was a lot
Mm.
of really embarrassing closed doors testimony about stuff the CIA had been doing. That stuff
Oh.
absolutely leaked.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I don't think it's out
They're
of
in
the
the
realm of
woods.
possibility that there is no official declassification, but we still hear some of the stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's value in just the hearing of it because then they can. I'm sure they have an equivalent to Freedom of Information Act, the
Mhm.
Declassify This Shit Right Now Act, or whatever. Um,
Yeah, totally.
so I suspect they have
All
a
right.
couple powers we don't. Yeah.
Mhm.
Ooh.
So, final point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is the
yeah,
one, right?
UAP redefined. This is the one you've been waiting for. You heard the definition. So, the bill does change the statutory catch all term for the phenomena being targeted from unidentified aerial phenomenon to unidentified anomalous phenomenon.
Uh,
Uh, it's worth noting the new term has the same definition as the old
yeah.
term, which is
Okay,
funny.
but why? That's the fun part.
So
That's what I
we'll
want to
get to
know.
that in a sec. So
Okay.
the definition, I think, is notable because, again, it says what Congress is looking for. This is another one of those informed questions. They're not just
Okay.
saying, tell us about the unknown stuff. They're saying, tell us about any unidentified aerial objects. Okay. Tell us about any unidentified submerged objects. Okay. We've been hearing rumors about
Okay. Yeah.
USOs for years, less common, but they're there. And importantly, tell us about transmedium objects that are
Okay.
not immediately identifiable.
Okay.
Transmedium is defined very clearly as objects that move between space, aerial flight, and submerged flight.
Okay. Okay.
That,
Interesting.
again, that is a very particular request. That is not a,
Yeah.
yeah, we think there are USOs and we think there are UFOs and maybe there's some in space. No, they're saying we know that there are some that have been going back and forth between, and you need to tell us about those.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
So
why? Why did this
UAP
change?
used to be aerial. It is now anomalous phenomenon. We don't know why it changed. We just know that
Okay.
it did.
Okay.
But Chris Mellon shared a funny story that I wouldn't be surprised if this was related. He says the Air Force were actually telling Congress in the first 2 years of this process, well, we don't need to tell you anything on space because UAP stands for unidentified aerial phenomenon.
Of
I,
course.
I kid you not. This is absolutely for real. Congressional staff have shown me the correspondence on this. They were playing that semantic game and hiding behind language to avoid having to address the issue.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know, but I can totally imagine, like some congressional staff are like, are you fucking fine? You pull up the
Fine. We're
NDAA,
writing this in.
cross out.
Yeah.
You want to play it that way?
All right, let's play it. Oh my gosh. This is great. I wanted to tell you something really. Uh, this podcast has changed my way of thinking, and I
Oh
wanted to
yeah.
tell you that. I was in I was in sort of a hippie store today. They were talking to me
Uh-huh.
about what was it? Quantum something hypnosis, and
Ooh.
and it struck me as like at first it struck me as total hokum. Um,
Uh-huh.
but while I was sitting there, I started thinking, but if any part of this is true, whew, I was like, oh
Yes,
wait, it's happening! It's happening!
it's happening.
Yeah. So like,
Yeah,
okay, this is a really cool mindset. This is a cool shift. I
totally,
like it.
totally. Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because for me, that shift happened with, we fight about this term, but when the government admitted UFOs were real,
Yeah.
that was a watershed moment for me because
Yeah.
I'd always kind of believed they were real. But
Sure.
if you have this spectrum of like, okay, there are anomalous objects in the sky. Okay,
Yeah.
sure. Those anomalous objects are not made by man. Hmm, all right, sure. I guess that's possible. Those anomalous objects are piloted by alien beings from Alpha Centauri 2. Okay, okay, sure. Those anomalous objects are being piloted by time travelers who are actually us from the future and are coming back to retrieve genetic material. And that's what's behind alien abductions. Oh, wait, alien abductions. We haven't talked about those. And I
Mm.
guess if we're going to talk about those, that kind of overlaps with Bigfoot in a weird, confusing way. So now are we thinking about Bigfoot? Like,
Oh
and if we're
wow.
talking
Yeah.
about Bigfoot, now we got to talk about hollow Earth theory, which, okay,
What?
now we're definite. Like, now we're in the deep end of the pool, but I don't know where that line was. I never
Yeah.
did, right? Like that's kind of the spectrum of like from
Yeah.
the probably real to the boy, I really don't know about this and I have some doubts about you if you're
Yeah.
advocating for it. But where does that line fall? And what was exciting for me is when the government puts a stake in the ground and says, no, there are unidentified objects up there and they are moving in ways that we cannot explain and they are not man made.
Yeah.
That shifts the bar
Yeah.
over a pretty
Dramatically.
significant amount. And now all these other things that I would have put in, probably not, are now suddenly adjacent to the thing that I take
Right.
as confirmed for real.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, man. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it is a wild place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Whew. Very exciting.
Woo! All right, man. We've been rambling a long
Yep.
time, but I want to wrap us up with one last thing. So we've been doing this podcast for what, 3 months now? Something like that?
Something like that. Yeah.
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 We've got 5 or 6 episodes up. So anyway, how are you feeling about it, man? It's the end of the year. We're about to take a break. We're going to come back strong in January. You feeling good? You
I'm
you
feeling great
excited to
about
do
it.
this?
I'm enjoying it and I'm learning stuff. I am clearly mental shifts are happening, and I like that new openness to being
Mhm.
surprised and delighted by the world. It's very cool.
I
So
like
I'm
that.
jazzed.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah, leaving yourself open for those astonishing moments that maybe you would
Yeah,
have been closed off to before. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
great.
So I'm digging it. How are you feeling?
Oh man, I'm so pumped. We talked about
Good.
this a little bit in the first episode, but like this went from something that I was not ashamed of, but kind of like
Yeah,
quietly into, to
yeah.
being something that I'm kind of, like Annie, like, really? You want to be the UFO guy? Like, yeah, you know what?
Yeah.
I do. I
All
do.
right.
I
Yeah.
didn't know I wanted to be, but now that we've started, absolutely.
Yeah. Out of out of that closet and into the light. Yeah.
All right,
Amazing.
man. Well, thank you all for joining us on It's a Very Exciting Time. We're taking a couple weeks off for the holidays. We'll be back in early January. And Chuck, as always, my wife thanks you for listening to me talk about UFOs so she doesn't have to.